You've been called negative, a naysayer, a disruptor. But what if you're just paying attention? Right now in schools, things can feel off. And just because others aren't naming the problem, it doesn't mean that you are the problem. Being a changemaker often starts with noticing what others would rather ignore. But while they're burying their heads in the sand and you're shouting from the rooftops, nobody is actually being heard. And that can be really frustrating. Hello, welcome if you're new. I'm Christina. I'm an educator and a mentor for educators who are changemakers, hoping to transform education from within. I've spent a decade in international education and collaborated with some amazing school leaders in ambitious schools. And do you know what I've noticed? The most effective school reforms actually don't come as big top-down policies. They start as purpose-driven ideas by educators in classrooms that try something small, a tiny experiment, and then share that idea and their learning outward. So this video and this whole video series are letters to my past self, the me that was in a classroom, overworked, stressed, titled negative, a naysayer. And I want to remind her that 1, you're not alone in trying to improve education. 2, your daily efforts to move the needle do matter. And 3, real change is happening in education. You might just not be aware of it. So grab your coffee and let's dig into what I wish I'd known as a changemaker educator. Basically, you have been called a cynic. You are the one who is constantly trying to bring people up to speed and get to the realistic boundary of where we're trying to start from. But everyone's like, you're just telling us we can't. You're just talking about all the problems. And that is annoying. Because really what you want to do is get everyone to be honest about where we're starting, how we don't have the buy-in from the families, how our students' scores are stressing us out, especially as testing or assessment time is coming up, and that this new idea, new shiny thing, is probably not going to have the impact that we want. And when you bring up those ideas, especially in meetings or in leadership talks, you often get the rolled eyes and the, please stop. Because when you are noticing things, you are actually problem solving. And that's not a flaw. It's actually the first step to effective reform. But here's the challenge. Nobody asked you to do the reform. And that's where you're stuck. Because your voice is drawing out the hard truths that a lot of people don't want to attend to. They want to believe that it's sunshine and rainbows and they can figure it out if they just throw something new and shiny at the problem. It doesn't work. And you see that, but others don't. So your voice can feel out of place, but it doesn't mean what you're saying is wrong, and it doesn't mean that you should sit in the back and be quiet. Instead, what you have to do is figure out a way to spot the flaws and use them to diagnose and approach these conversations in a way where you're sharing observations, not setting up all of the obstacles. Basically, think of it like you're driving a car and you're in the front seat, but you're not the driver, the passenger. And instead of trying to grab the wheel and swing around a big boulder in the road, you're saying, maybe we should pay attention to possible boulders in this part of the road because I've heard that there are possibly some rocks that have fallen off the mountain. It's a different way of presenting your ideas. And this is really hard. As educators, we are excellent at communicating with students, with our colleagues, with our families, but we're not necessarily great at communicating up the hierarchy to leaders, especially if we don't have that big L leader role. So, think about it instead as you're trying to share an insight, a diagnosis that is not necessarily confirmed yet. To mix metaphors, let's talk about a doctor who's not exactly sure what they've seen on the scans. They don't want to scare their patient. They just want to start getting some more data. They start asking about symptoms. They start asking about habits, lifestyle. They're not saying this could be something bad. They're just starting to gather information. In education, we need to start bringing other people into seeing from our point of view slowly. Because when we just shout, the sky is falling, or, the wolf is coming, nobody hears us, and that's ineffective too. And it just started raining really hard here in Rio, so I hope you can hear me. When we point out that systemic misalignment, all the emotional labor, the inequitable practices, etc., that's wrong with our schools today. We have to be seen, not that we're complaining, but that we're diagnosing to be able to be heard. Because if you're not heard, which is actually ironic with the storm right now, can you hear me? We're not going to get anywhere. That brings me to my next point, which is that care often sounds like a critique. You've probably got this through feedback. When someone gives you some critique about your work, your teaching, you need to actively process it as they're caring about your growth and your professional abilities, not critiquing you and telling you that you're bad or something negative. And if right now that hits a chord, I would highly suggest working on that, because that is going to help you as a leader and a change maker to detach from other people's opinions and stay grounded in what has been observed and what the facts are. Bringing up the sky is falling issues, it's often how you communicate your care about the students and the people in your educational community. You care so much about them being able to be successful that you do what you're good at. You notice all the obstacles. You notice them because you want things to be better. And if you didn't care, you wouldn't even be looking. So think about it for yourself and start to reframe it outwards for others. You are noticing because you care. You're diagnosing to bring others into the conversation. You are investing in going forward together. You're not trying to critique and bring things down and be resistant. You are not the boulder. You are trying to help everyone notice it before we get there. Which brings us to the other idea that there's a binary in schools, and it also in corporate settings as well, and probably other jobs, where if you don't go with what's being decided by the majority, you are not a team player. You are basically the negative one, the active problem in the group. And this is where we kind of get into social dynamics, because that binary really protects this hierarchy of authority that is built into schools inherently, and it protects that status quo of who needs to get approval, who gets to have a say, who gets to have a voice. And we can talk about how that's not completely fair, but it does exist and we have to work within that system for now. So when you are putting yourself in a space and being told that you're negative, there does need to be some self-reflection of how can I shift the perception of me so that they don't see me as an antagonist, going against the plans, but they see me as a team player who is involved in scoping things out, kind of a scout, look ahead, And it's all about how you bring up your ideas. Again, the communication element, noticing who you're speaking to, in what dynamic you're bringing that conversation. For example, please don't bring up a critique about a leader in front of everyone else. Have that as a side conversation, send the emails, set a meeting. There is a lot of protection that comes up psychologically when someone feels attacked in a group. And I'm not saying that just as a leader to a colleague, but if you are going to call someone out at your friend's party, they're going to also feel that sense of psychological insecurity, which it just doesn't help you in any way. So have a private meeting where you can talk through these issues. For example, I was chatting with an amazing educator who was sharing a story about an educator she knows from a previous school. So I've never actually interacted with this person, but this is a passed on story about how this educator kept seeing all of the problems with unsustainable workload in their school. So this guy would go into team meetings and say, I don't feel like this is fair. They're having all of these prep times. I'm not. They have all these resources. I don't. I'm having to also do this, this, and this because it's my role, and fine, I signed up for it, but still, this doesn't match. And bringing these concerns up in a group setting was pretty clearly not effective. he was getting told that he was very negative. He needed to, figure his things out, prioritize, use his time wisely, which gave him this idea. He was going to run a time audit on his week. And actually, I think he did multiple weeks just to have enough. And mapped out all of the time he spent on instruction, like in front of students, and emotional support with students, because he was high school, I believe, and on logistical aspects, and also on the demands of the school, like the duties and the clubs that he had to run. Then, after he gathered all this data, he went and set a meeting with the school leader who could actually talk to him and affect the schedule. They then spoke about the time audit, because he brought it in visually, and did his best to detach from it emotionally. He said, just, here's the data. This is how I spent my time. And they talked about it, And that data affected the leader enough that they could reset the schedule for the upcoming semester so that it was a little bit more fair in this educator's view. And this didn't have to be a wide discussion. It was one person saying, I see an issue, I'm going to gather data, and I'm going to bring it to a leader in a private space where we can actually talk about it and our psychological safety is intact. And that's really the takeaway here. You need to see it from the other person's point of view when you're bringing up problems, when you're bringing up the issues, when you're bringing up the cracks and the obstacles and the boulders. Because, yes, they need to be shared. But how you share them, there is an art to that. The communication, the understanding of social dynamics. That's where you really step into being a leader, because you understand how to get your message across and be heard. So, to wrap this up, noticing is the first step. Communicating effectively is leadership. And you can't just jump ahead. You can't just tell everyone that we have problems with the attendance system and then students are skipping class and this is a major issue. You also need to come at it with the sense of, I'm not the only one who notices this. I'm not the only one who cares about this. And yes, my care is driving my concern, but there is a sense of what do I need to bring as a diagnosis to this conversation? Which leader do I need to talk to? What evidence do I need to gather before we can take true action on it? And some of these things, like we've talked about before, you can't do big actions. You have to start small. You have to just notice which students come in tardy. It's small things, because your role is not about fixing stuff. You are a problem solver. You notice issues. But communicating effectively, that's leadership. And as a changemaker, you are automatically also a leader when you take on the work of sharing your ideas with others. So you can't fix everything, and you shouldn't need to. Detach from your ego this sense of responsibility for solving all of the world's problems. You can't do it. But you can step into the role of noticing, diagnosing, and bringing it forward as a concern that others might share to the leaders who can actually make a difference in a space that conserves everyone's psychological safety. You don't need to pretend that everything's fine, but you do need to stay grounded and consider other people's perspective. Otherwise, you are putting yourself outside of belonging, and that is eventually just going to hurt you more. So, you are not negative, you are noticing. But to become a leader, you need to actively communicate in an effective way. That's how you create real reform. You need to keep seeing clearly, keep speaking up, and make sure that you speak in a way that you are heard. Otherwise, it's just falling on deaf ears. If this resonated with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Please consider letting me know how you have dealt with being called negative or naysayer in your school and what you found to be effective. Also, if you have any ideas for future videos, because I want these videos to speak not just to the past me, but maybe a past you, where you've struggled with your identity as a change maker in education and all of the systemic problems that we're facing. Finally, feel free to find me on the internet. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I have my Substack. and I would love to connect and support you as a change maker in education. All right, ciao!